This is Ed, and I'm in San Diego. I know you can't tell, but this is the logo and Blue Ocean. And with us in New York today is James Moss, Curzon Central. Welcome, James.
Hi Ed, great to be here. Thank you for
Yeah,
inviting
great. I thank you for putting up your new logo. This is one of the first times the world will see this. I think it's really simple, very attractive, and tells the story. James Moss, you've recently rebranded, as we're seeing, and bringing together the tech and the bespoke services for high net worth individuals and others. Tell
me.
us more.
Exactly. Thanks. Yeah, exactly that. So Curzon has always been doing real estate and has always been doing relocation. And during COVID, we moved much more to a tech platform on the relocation side, which so the two have always been reasonably separate. And we used a different vehicle for that. We used a company called Absolute Relo, which really was doing quite well, getting a good head of steam, but it was all based on more of a technology pay-as-you-go type of model. The tech was absolutely fantastic. The app is great, for example. But what we were finding is that post-COVID, as the world is now what 3 or 4 years on from COVID now, there's been much more of a convergence of different sectors sort of all coming together. So you have your private client real estate side, which for us includes people like international students and business people, partners at law firms, all that sort of stuff, sort of high-end relocation stuff, more private client stuff, if you like. Um, when these people often buy properties as well as rent, so it's an interesting mix. And then we have the sort of traditional and non-traditional corporate relocation side. The corporate is more traditional, where companies want to move executives and employees and talent around. And it's interesting how it's devolved into a combination now of what I call traditional services, destination services, which is much more hand-holding type of thing. It's what companies often are used to, particularly for more senior people. Um, and also a desire and a need for much more cost-effective and tech-friendly, sort of more mobile, shorter projects sometimes, moves or relocations, as they're called in the industry here. Um, and that is where our app technology and Absolute's former technology was really, really good, which is now Curzon Relo. And what we've now done is that we combine the two together because there's such a convergence. So from the point of view of clients and users and our own team, everyone now works as a Curzon. And it's just much, much easier to deal with. The other thing is that we've often found this in our business, is that when we're working with private clients or conversely with senior relocation clients, they often turn around to us and say, hey, could you help us buy something or rent something or do something other than you're just doing at the moment? To which the answer is yes. So I'll give you a good example. We acted a while ago for one of the big four management tax consultancy firms, and we moved a couple of their partners around. And one of their partners turned around afterwards and said, "Hey, I actually need to buy a house as well. I've moved from here to there. I've settled down. We rented a place, but we actually now want to buy a house." And it was actually quite a big house, and as one would sort of expect in a rather lovely area. And we were able to do that for him and his family. And we subsequently bought two other investment properties for him, which we ended up managing and helping him steer and so on. So that's just one example of where the two cross. So yeah, it's a great combination. Curzon Central is our main brand. The Relo side, the tech Relo side is Curzon Relo. That is the name of the app in the app stores, where you can go to the Apple Store, the Google Play Store, and find it there. So yeah, all together now.
Wow, that's quite a story. Congratulations. Excuse me. Pardon
Pleasure.
me.
Gesundheit.
Well, I'm human. See, that's like a thing. I think that's the first time in 4 years I've sneezed on the air. But I've sneezed in the air, but not on the air.
No,
So, okay. Anyway, back to
right,
business here.
right.
So the New York conference that's being hosted by the U.S. headquarters of HSBC, the London Hong Kong Bank, Global Trade Bank, first time in New York. And that's coming up on 12/12, and you're going to be a speaker and featured go-to person about the business scene and about this innovation that you're talking about right now. And I thank you for enabling that
Well,
to happen.
great. I think it's going to be a fantastic conference. Thoroughly looking forward to it, Ed. You always get great participants and panels and very engaging. Yeah, so I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm definitely going to be there.
Thank you. So our opening keynoter, after Doug Gallardo and me do our intros and take the mic around the room and introduce people in the audience, is going to be PhD, organizational development, industrial psychology guy who's working with a company called Radical. His name is Ken Oler, and he's going to be talking about the impact of the recent U.S. elections on business strategy and how the surprise of the win and the scope and dimension of it, meaning the demographic support that President Trump has wound up getting, is first of all fascinating, but second of all, it's got people on edge across the board, all kinds of people, not just one group. So he's going to be talking about the business impact, what's going on in companies, and how companies have to communicate with the team and, of course, customers, primarily the internal team, and making sure everybody is cool and can focus on business. And that's what he's going to be talking about, the techniques. He's also going to do something with their own technology, a short uh, lesson about how one's individual skills and specific interests can merge together. And he's going to do a lot better explanation than me. But it's all about who are the people in the company, on the team, and how do you get them to communicate better, clearer, faster, and more comfortably? It's by sharing ideas, of course, and by knowing something about the people and where specific interests lie.
I, I I
That
think it'll
that
be
could come.
I think it'll be fascinating actually.
Yeah.
And
So thank you very much.
yeah, no, there have been some interesting changes in America with the election and the outcome, which the polls managed to get wrong again. Interestingly, so
That
I mean, I
nobody
think
ever
all
asked me.
no, no, wait, who are these people? I mean,
I don't
really,
know.
I mean,
Did they ask you for an opinion?
they didn't ask me. No, they didn't ask my wife either or anyone. They sort of no, I didn't ask anyone I know. Um, Maybe I don't know enough people or the right people. I don't know. But the polls are amazingly consistent at getting it wrong, in my view. And I was reading an article over the weekend where the polls were actually congratulating themselves for getting it so right, which was sort of rather
That,
contrary to what I was thinking. And they justified it by their margin of error being 3% or whatever it is. But you know what? You can't argue it away with statistics. They just constantly don't get it right. I mean, all the swing states went to President-elect Trump. You look in the UK as well. We had a new government, a Labour government, who swept in, and the polls actually got that a little bit more right, but they got it wrong by the scale of the swing. And I think polls are all about margin, really. They're all about what is the trend, what is the scale going to be. And I think, in the States, they certainly they got it wrong, or they miscommunicated it pretty badly. And there tends to be a left-leaning bias to polls, actually. And I'm not being political here, not left or right, and sort of somewhere in the middle, I guess. But there's this sort of natural leaning, and one sort of wonders why that is. I mean, maybe it's because pollsters, maybe they're more East and West Coast based. I don't actually know. Um, but
So you know what else? It's just that the media got behind it, particularly the cable channels. Everybody in media said the poll said this, the poll said that, day in and day out for weeks. And it just turned out to be bullshit. Pardon
yeah,
me,
well,
but that's what it was.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's what caused so many people now in the aftermath, in the immediate aftermath, to be uneasy and worried and even afraid, particularly with some of the recent extraordinary events.
Well, I think
Amsterdam, other places, is crazy.
I think it's interesting. It's the fear of the unknowns. I think a lot of the rhetoric has been quite alarmist, and maybe that has been used to emphasize direction. Um, what will that actually translate into once the new administration is in office? And
Mm.
I think the thing is, people just so uncertain. We don't actually know.
Right.
Um, it seems that it's not so much rigid policy. I know there's immigration and there's, thoughts on the economy and stuff like that, but it's not really defined policy. It's more sort of, rah, rah, this is what we want to do. We're going to be tough, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And one wonders just how much thought has gone on behind it, particularly when you look at the financials, you look at the economic impact, not just short term, but long term. You look at the global ramifications, which I think is really going to be fascinating, um, to see how, global trade reacts. Um, Housing is quite an interesting one. Um, in the UK, for example, so in London, um, property is strongly influenced by central government policy. So planning, obviously interest rates, which, okay, is independent, but basically that is sort of how you shift, right? In the United States, it's done at state and local level. It's actually done at a different level. The thing that I'm sort of interested in, just wearing my property hat for a moment, rather than, and again, probably rolls into relocation because it's where you get investment and landlords buying properties and all that stuff, is the whole sort thing, is state and local tax allowances. And what's quite interesting there, I think, is that under the previous Trump administration, those were capped. And it particularly hit the West Coast, California, and New York, and New York and the New York metro area, New Jersey, and so on. And one thing feels that that was maybe a bit politicized because you have a very high percentage of Democratic voters there. What's really interesting, I think, is that cap looks as though it may be removed. And will it be replaced with another cap, or will it just be taken off the table? And this is one of the things actually that can have a bit of a direct influence
So let me ask you, for
on the property
definition,
market.
the cap would be on putting a roof on how much tax there could be?
Yeah, so the cap at the moment, and I might be slightly out on the figures, it's $10,500 a year. So any property taxes, state taxes you pay up to 10,000, you don't have to pay tax on. So anything over than that, you do. Now, prior to that, there was no cap. So you could set off your entire state and property taxes, on your IRS tax return. Um, and that was a big hit when that came in. And it's interesting that the thinking may have changed. I say may have changed because we don't actually know yet. But it is widely reported in the media and by those close to President-elect Trump that that is going to be on the table. So it'll be
So
interesting to see what
therefore,
happens there.
you and me and other homeowners could used to be able to uh, deduct state and local taxes from the federal tax. Is that
Yeah,
correct? And then there
that's
was
right. So
a cap put on it or an elimination of that benefit.
yeah,
And so
that's
now
the
the
gist of
talk
it.
is, just to sum up, is that there's talk about removing the cap, which means the tax deduction feature can increase.
Yeah,
So in other
exactly.
words, you could deduct possibly more
Yeah.
against federal taxes.
Yes, that's the gist of it. I'm not quite sure what columns they fall into on the tax form. I'm not an expert at filling in IRS tax forms.
Me
Um,
too.
yeah, and a few of us are, I think. But the bottom line is that you get the tax break,
Yeah,
and that
interesting. Wow.
no,
Yeah.
it's good. I mean, it's great news, certainly in the Northeast and out in California. You know, basic places where you have higher, higher property values, and therefore you have, property taxes tend to follow those. Um,
So it's interesting now. I was well, we were driving back yesterday from the home in Palm Desert, Palm Valley Country Club, and we're back here in San Diego now, and we're listening on the radio, and there was um, somebody talking. I don't know what station it was, but they were talking about, if I can get this right in my brain here today, still early in the morning here.
yeah,
Um,
I know the feeling.
yeah, they were talking about the speculation in the stock market since the election. You know, it just exploded up, and
Yeah,
because and it's a bet. That's what investors, VCs, bankers, a lot of people, they were betting that it's going to be better for business, at least in the short run, at least between now and inauguration day, that it looks like it's just going to be a great American economy unleashed.
yeah. It's really interesting. The Trump trade, as it's referred to down the road here on Wall Street. And the markets had a phenomenal bounce. Certainly the day after, the morning after the night before, sort of thing. They were apoplectic with desire for a strong Trump economy. Um, I mean, and certain things stand out. So Tesla, dear old Elon Musk. I mean, his shares went up 15% that following day. I mean, okay, he's slightly, he's so close to Trump, but across the board, deregulation is seriously on the cards with a new Trump presidency. Um, and I think
Meaning the
that,
Federal Trade Commission will be certainly changed.
yeah, and I think the other thing that's going to be interesting is what happens with the Fed. Trump is enormously hostile to the Fed. He doesn't believe in an independent Fed. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or bad thing. I'm just saying this is what he's saying. And we know that Trump would love to take control of interest rates. Trump is a business animal. He's, he is a fairly hard-nosed new property developer or from that ilk. And he was never very popular in New York, by the way, in the property world. Um, but he's my way of looking at it is basically you've got to say, well, what is going to be good for Trump personally and his businesses? And if you can figure that out, then that's going to give you a very good clue as to how he's going to be looking to position the economy, taxes and legislation, and so on. Um, is he free market, open market? I'm not sure he is. I think actually he's quite protectionist. I mean, clearly he's talking about tariffs and so on. But internally within the US, yes, I would say he is a free marketeer. But but part of his strategy, and this is where it really starts getting tricky, is going to be putting tariffs on people importing goods or exporting goods to the United States. And, one size doesn't fit all. The problem with that is further down the line. The problem with that is that it's going to make US products a lot more expensive internally to Americans because of the way the supply chains work, the global supply chains
So
work.
basically, that is going to land squarely on top of the heads of the working class that he promised this and promised that to, but he's never explained in simple language that it's that population group
Yeah,
that believed in him enough to vote for him. That's who's going to get hurt much more than the current recent inflation post-COVID.
exactly, and that's what's going to happen. It will trigger inflationary pressures. That will mean that either, the Fed will have to respond in some way. Maybe it's slowing down, just not being, hopefully it's just more of a slowdown on interest rates coming down. But you can't rule out the interest rates starting to head in the other direction. That's the more of the, I'd say the traditional way. I mean, over the last, since the Second World War, really. That is the way one addresses inflation. I mean, it's all governments across the world do that. So yeah, I mean, it can have a very much a backhanded impact on those people who voted for him. Yeah.
So I am not a financial guy, although I look at the Wall Street Journal every day, but the bond market is what we're talking about here. And the big traders of bonds, these people who somehow know what they're doing with bonds. We all thought that with the interest rate cut last month or the month before, and then the current one, that mortgage rates will go down. But they did fall a little bit, but now they're bouncing up again. And
Yeah.
this is because the bond market rates are impacted by some really heavy duty investors who buy bonds, right? And the interest rates have ticked up, not gone down.
Yeah, you get all these sort of very sort of contradictory events taking place in the market. The markets are totally irrational, by the way. I mean, I followed them quite closely. I'm not an expert. I mean, have an economics degree, which is useful, but times change and things move on a bit. Um, and the bond situation, I mean, reflects that the money's got to come somewhere from somewhere to pay for all this stuff that's been proposed. So repatriation of immigrants, deportation rather, I think it's the blunter word. And it's going to cost a lot of money to do that. Um, Build the wall, lock in the borders, the southern borders. I mean, to do that is these are serious bits of expenditure. Bits is an understatement. They're massive, and the money's got to come from somewhere, and that money is either coming from the taxpayer. Ultimately, it will come from the taxpayer. The government will go out and it will borrow it from the banks. But ultimately, that is where the money is going to have to be found. And the taxpayer and the economy, companies. Um, Again, the British model is quite interesting, where the British model, the American model, are often quite similar, but where they tend to really change, and this is particularly this is actually with income tax and capital gains tax, is on the thresholds. So the the levels at which the tax kicks in. And in the United States, the tax levels where the tax kicks in tend to be much higher. Okay, which sort of means that there's more money will flow into the economy. The economy should benefit from that. In places like the UK and the other countries as well, because the tax thresholds are so much lower, there's less feeding through to the system. The bond market, I'm not an expert on bonds, and they're you know they're priced inversely to their returns just to make it a bit more interesting. But they're you know they're very sensitive, and you think they're going to move one way, and then actually they start to move in another. And of course, you've got, you know, a variety. You've got your 10-year bonds, your 30-year bonds, you've got your 2-year short term. I mean, you know, these are all indicators of, you know, how economists and you know markets see where the economy is going to go and where inflation's going to go. But at the end of the day, it is a gamble. You know, I love the American expression "crap shoot" because often, you know, you have all these incredibly intelligent, well-versed, experienced traders and bond dealers and so on. And you think these guys know something we don't know. And at the end of the day, you can put, you know, a 5-year-old kid in there with a dartboard and put something on the and he'll probably outperform the pros.
So the what we're talking about here is how the government, U.S. government, pays for things, and it's the treasuries and the dollar standard, gold standard worldwide is what juices all that. Now that's where my knowledge ends. But uh, so the price of that loan, okay, I need a crazy number, 100 billion, $1 trillion, okay, and the interest rate's going to be okay. How much is the government going to have to pay the bondholders? And who are the bondholders? Well, it's other banks, all right, and foundations and really super rich people. Nobody
Yeah,
else
yeah,
gets
pension
involved,
funds,
right?
you know, those sorts of types. Yeah, yeah. I mean, everything is so interconnected, and it's really complicated. I mean, it's really complicated. You throw swaps in there as well, and then you know, the micro movements that take place there. I mean, you know, you have to. My favorite joke. Can I tell you my favorite economist joke?
Yes, please.
My favorite economist joke was told by a guy called Eddie George, who was the governor of the Bank of England, who was the forerunner to Mark Kearney, who did such a great job. And Eddie George's favorite joke was, and he used to say this at Mansion House dinners in front of the great and the famous. He said, in my experience, there are three types of economists: those who can count and those who can't.
Three.
Not bad from the governor of the Bank of England.
Well, let's talk about real estate property. So, what kind of people are buying? Now, I know you alluded to this earlier, about 10 minutes ago, and that is just a great customer story. And so, thanks for sharing that. Uh, but who is buying into the U.S.? And it's mainly Manhattan, I guess. All the, what percentage of all these super califragilistic buildings that have been built recently, basically since COVID, in Manhattan, these very tall, skinny high rises,
Yeah,
aren't they
yeah,
afraid it's going to fall over, or
yeah.
the wind's
The-
going to pick it up and take it to China or something? I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
But
exactly.
but they build it right, whoever they are, and uh, these cost a fortune to buy.
Yeah, I mean, they're amazing buildings here. The Steinway one's just down the road from me. I sort of go by, I look at these every day because one's here and wandering around and driving into Manhattan, coming across the bridges. You know, the view is just stunning. I mean, it takes every time it takes my breath away. It really does. I mean, that's not a cliche. It really, really does. I go, wow, look at it. It's phenomenal. To answer your question, it's pretty well, most of them, most of the over the last, certainly since the pandemic, has been domestic American buyers, have been most of the big hitters here. The usual suspects, as you would say, so the hedge fund guys, the big bankers, people like Ken Griffith, for example. Um, these are the guys who have been doing the buying. Um, some of the tech guys have been here, and they've, Bezos and various others, but mostly it's been from what I've been seeing, and I'm very close to it. It tends so far to have been more Americans doing here. I'm not saying there hasn't been any international, but it's tricky for international buyers. They're a little reluctant to buy here unless they can actually uh, make it, very clear that they can get into the sort of US finance system and so on. Part of the problem, I'm not saying that, that people are crooked or they're doing anything wrong, but part of the problem here is that there is this, I would call it a great misunderstanding or paranoia about international money coming into the New York property market, not just the New York market, but we're talking about New York, we're talking about Manhattan predominantly here. Because the professionals here, so the lawyers and the accountants and so on, there's a relatively small alcove with these people who are actually good and comfortable with dealing with international funds. If you go to it's all to do with money laundering protection, and the federal government and the IRS are particularly diligent and I would say aggressive in sort of looking out for policing anything that they're not comfortable with. And what that has done, what that I think has done, is that I think it's created quite a lot of paranoia within the real estate and related professionals here. So, I've often dealt with accountants, lawyers, obviously, and you can sort of, you can hear the deep intake of breath if you're talking about a client who may be coming through a tax neutral jurisdiction. So say the US Virgin Islands or the Cayman Islands, Switzerland. I mean, these are all outside of America, all absolutely standard in my experience in London, in the Middle East, in Dubai, in Europe. It's quite common. They're vehicles that people use not to hide money, but really just to internationally organize themselves. And it's tricky here. So what we do, we do quite a bit of this actually. We work with international clients on the real estate front, Ed, okay, to steer them through the processes to ensure that they can get through and get their properties. We do it as a buyer's agent, okay, which we've done in London for 25 years, but we're now doing that here in New York, in the States. But we do it almost every day with international relocation assignees coming in to New York and to the metro area. And the classic, so I'll give you a couple of examples on this. So one of the things that is absolutely standard with New York landlords, American landlords, is getting a credit rating. Okay, for the tenant, you need to know the credit rating. But of course, if you're international and coming to work States for the first time, and you're working with a bank or pension fund or whatever, I mean, really, big companies, terribly well funded, and big salaries, you can't get a credit rating because you haven't got a credit history. So what we do is we help them, for example, get social security numbers. because that's the other thing you have to have. You can't get a credit rating unless you've got a social security number. But you can get a visa to come into the States, a work visa, without a social security number. So you sort of got this sort of swirl going on, if you like. And what we do is we put those ducks in a row, and we guide our clients to enable them to get these things, to tick these boxes. And then we go to the landlords or the landlords agents, and we steer the agents and the landlords through, and we present a profile. And that profile is often a combination of American documentation with their own domestic background. So to give you an example of that, we've recently acted for a couple of Australians, I'm delighted to say, even though they beat us at the rugby on Saturday, and that was not so hard. But you got to love them, though. They're a great, great, great team. So the Wallabies. So we love acting for sort of Antipodeans. They're great. But what we did is we said, okay, you don't have an American credit rating, and we can explain that away, but you've probably got a good domestic credit rating. They go, yeah, we got a great credit rating in Australia, or London, wherever it's going to be. So, right, get that screenshot, get that credit rating, okay? And we're going to present that to the American landlords and the American agents so they can see you're not some bod who's, just got off the boat type of thing, that you actually are a professional person with a history, with assets, with a net worth. And we put the package together. And these are just examples. There are other things we do as well. And guess what? We have a 100% success rate. We haven't had any rejections at all. But we know what we're doing. We know how to present it. We know how we understand people's concerns. We know where people are going to say no. And we say, okay, we understand that, but here is this additional information. And and the same is true when you're acting for clients who are buying, because they have to bring funds into the United States. Sometimes they borrow in the United States. I mean, we work with a bank who you know very well, who are excellent in that space. And we've actually been able to pre-fund clients before they come over.
Fascinating talking with you, James Moss, and I just can't wait to circulate this program across the Global Business News Network, because that's all business people and many international. And according to LinkedIn, this is as we come to a close here, according to LinkedIn, approximately 70% of our viewing audience this past year has been a boom year, expansion of everything. Um, Approximately 70% of our viewers of programs like this, because of the distribution network that I've set up, very fortunately to be able to do that, and I'm grateful, is the number one market is Metro New York, as you described it, but the number two market is UK, and and the London business community, and all the communities around London where businesses are situated, big business, more than 1,000 employees. In fact, more than 40% of the audience are managers or executives within companies having more than 1,000 employees. That's our a large segment of our audience. And 70% are located in Metro New York region, which is a huge megalopolis, of course. And I will say that will include from Boston area south into Virginia along the coast. Pardon me, itchy nose. So the New York market, meaning the East Coast, Northeast, is number one in the world of audience. And number two is London Metro. And number three is, well, I'll call it California, because in the north is San Francisco and Silicon Valley, which is vast. And in the south is LA. And the LA region, Southern California, goes to the Mexican border, where I am. in San Diego. So it is, I mean, that's it. Now we have readers and audience in Paris and Geneva and even in Moscow and Saudi Arabia and Cape Town and down under as well, and in Tokyo and here and there. But that's the majority, and the energy, as I'm sure you would agree, Metro New York, Metro London, and California. That's it. That's more than 70% of the people who will watch this show.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, they're great markets. You know, the old sort of across the pond thing, which works both ways, always a cliche. But you know what?
It's real. It's true. It's
It
safe.
what's interesting is how much business, not necessarily UK or American business, goes through those channels. A lot of international goes through New York. A lot of international obviously goes through London. I mean, London is a great hub for Europe and for the Middle East. So, you know, the time difference between London and Dubai is only 3 hours. I mean, the flight's 8 hours, but the time difference is only three. The West Coast here is phenomenal. I mean, you look at let's go back to the election for a second. But I mean, you look at the final map, the election map of the United States, and yeah, you sort of got New York and you've got California, and the mindsets are very similar. And I also think, particularly tech and entertainment, being out on the West Coast is phenomenal. And the tech and entertainment industry for a long time has been really converging together. And it's a powerhouse out there, absolute
It
powerhouse.
it absolutely is. So back in 1984, 85, uh, when I was publishing a print magazine called California Bound, which was an area economic development PR tool, and also used as a recruitment tool and also used as a relocation information guide. The LA Chamber of Commerce and the LA Economic Development Corporation, those two organizations are like that, they became a partner with me in the early days. And because they saw the convergence back then, this is a long time ago, this being 2024, and that was 1984, 85. Okay. And California Bound became used by practically every relocation company and real estate company and major corporate employer. Uh, all of that coincided, just to give you some history and how it works together. And now coming up with uh, President Trump and the economic impact of that, President Reagan was elected in
Mm,
1980, and
mm,
he vowed to control do something with the evil empire, i.e., Moscow,
yeah.
and
Mm,
build up the Defense Department capabilities. And guess where that was circulated and based in California.
mm,
And so the LA Chamber of Commerce and the LA Economic Development Corporation, of course, knew that board members are the top level, the C level of every major company and, of course, smaller companies. And they said, Cohen, don't screw up. You're going to do really well. And we want this book to succeed. It's a magazine. And they bought
fantastic.
thousands of copies. And then I took that letter and all that around to every possible advertiser. And that was the glue. And now at that time, interest rates, housing interest rates, were like 15%, 18%.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
talk,
remember.
I mean, that's like whoa.
Yeah.
And the only people, other than the mega rich people, the only other people who could afford to possibly buy a home or a condo were people with a guaranteed income. And guess who
Mm.
has a guaranteed income? The companies that relocated certain people for a specific job and region. And that's what happened.
Fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. You know, the interesting, there's lots of interesting things about that, but one of the things that strikes me is that the processes haven't changed that much, actually.
It's going to
Uh,
happen again because
yeah,
the Defense Department, particularly the Navy, U.S. Navy, has, I mean, really strong. I'm here in San Diego, and
sure.
the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet is right across the street here, and and so we see it. I mean, there's plenty of glitzy, gleaming uh, naval ships that go right down the harbor here, but there's a lot of older ships, and so there has the defense capability, particularly with the threat of North Korea, Iran, China, not to mention Moscow. But this is crazy stuff, but it's going to repeat. Reagan came in with the idea of doing this and doing that and cutting taxes. And guess what? Trump read his playbook.
Yeah,
Trump
yeah,
read Reagan's playbook and just that's what he's doing. I mean, there's no mysteries. It's been done before. And Southern California just well, boom.
yeah. Well, it's you know, it's interesting on so many levels. I mean, we actually, I say we, my Curzon and my guys here, and my guys in London, we actually help HR write the letters. We tell them what they need to put in the letters. I mean, we
That's
tell,
really smart.
yeah, I mean, we sort of prescribe really what's got to go in, and we like to vet the letters before they're issued to the landlords, so we can edit them, fine tune them. I mean, we're not well, we are micromanaging a bit, but we're making sure that the right information is in there and it's saying the right thing in the right way, and it's really important. And you know, we use foreign bank statements as well. I mean, there are all sorts of things that we do to make sure, and it's exactly what you're saying, exactly what you're saying. And the bottom line is landlords, um, sellers, okay, want to know that the money's there and that it's going to be there. And if you're buying a property, you're buying a home or an apartment, or you're buying a commercial building, the first thing you do is you say proof of funds. Where are your proof of funds? Um, Relocation is exactly the same. Landlords are saying, where's the guarantee that that salary is there? And you know what we do? We do the letter for them. I mean, it's a one company letterheaded paper and stuff like that. I mean, it looks absolutely fantastic. But we also get copies of the pay slips, even though maybe a few dollars have just gone through. But we want to join the dots. So the pay slips, the letters, the bank accounts. So the landlords
It,
go, oh, duh, duh,
you
duh.
tell a story. You
You tell
tell a
the story.
story and there's no
Exactly.
BS or any inkling of
Exactly.
something weird. No, you go the other way and you just display it
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's true.
Yeah, yeah. And the
So
point about interest rates, just to add on that, is a really great one. And I remember that period really, really well. And I remember again, I'm going back to the UK because I was living in London at that time. And the British interest rates followed the American. Okay, so everyone was tracking it. And the chancellor was a guy called Norman Lamont. And in one day, Ed, I mean, in a few hours, one afternoon, the interest rates went from like 9% to 17%, and
ugh,
then back down to 15 or something. Now, this is the funny story. Funny, just to throw it in here. I actually met Norman Lamont a couple of years ago at a social bash in London, someone's drinks party somewhere. And sort of, when sort of, I recognize you, sort of thing, typical terrible thing. Anyway, we got chatting, and I said, what actually happened that day? And I can't remember if it was Black Monday or Black Friday, whatever it was. I think it was a terrible day. And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, well, the first thing to say is that I didn't know anything about it. He said, he said I was actually out giving a presentation that morning and lunchtime, and I didn't know anything about it until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when my staff briefed me.
Wow. Isn't that interesting?
That was the day that George Soros made his fortune,
Hmm.
gambling against the Bank of England. Yeah, I mean, these little sort of anecdotal things under the carpet you wonder how true. Well, you wonder, maybe it's just a great story he likes to tell. I don't know.
Fascinating. So,
Fascinating.
okay, how can people find you? What's the website?
Curzon Central is the easiest one. So curzoncentral.com.
That's it.
Um,
Okay.
if we also have a separate one for the tech, which that's coming together, curzonreload.com. So either of
Yeah.
those work perfectly
Okay.
well.
So why don't you swivel yourself that way or this way so people could see that display behind you? Okay.
Yep,
All
there
right.
we go.
Okay, a little bit more. And I'll
Slightly
get out
out
of
of.
my way because you're on Global TV Talk Show. As you could see, this is a business unit of globalbusinessnews.net. And you should go and see what the U.S. Chips and Science Act was all about. That was the massive um, Biden investment program to near shore um, tech manufacturing, taking it out of dangerous places and bringing it into the US and building up areas and building up workforce. And more on that later. And I will be republishing that exclusive interview that I had on Global TV with one of the chief architects, the writers of the U.S. Science Chips Act. And this is a woman who's an attorney, and she works for Samsung Electronics USA. And fascinating interview. And the Republican leadership has already said they're not going to revoke it, but they may amend it somewhat. Well, that's okay. They'll put more money to work. And so economic boom is happening right here in the US of A. And James Moss, thank you for being a customer and a member of the Global Press Club. And together we learn how to use this medium a lot better. And I invite you all to follow what James is doing. Tell us your story. Separate your personal brand from your professional brand. It's two pathways. Come learn from James and from me and others how to do it and how to apply it. Use Global TV for your vehicle, and you'll be glad you did. Use my audience. It's sort of like rent the runway, that clothing
Mm,
idea. Women can rent the clothing rather than buy it that they see on the fashion Milan or Paris or New York Fashion Week. They can rent those dresses, those outfits, rather than buy them. So rent my audience. Use it to build up your audience. And that's what
mm,
James has been
mm.
doing. Thank
Excellent,
you for playing
excellent.
my game here. Okay, this is Ed signing off from the Mexican border, and James is in Midtown Manhattan. I'll see you in a month.
Excellent. Great.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Cheers, Ed. Thank you very much.